Do you want to make the softest and longest lasting fresh bread possible? Well, it's pretty simple and it's a great way to start baking bread. This is Breakfast for Pancakes. Today, we are going to be making milk bread. Milk bread came about in Japan in the 20th century, and it uses a cooking technique called Tang Zhong. It's something of an internet sensation and is known for its soft, pillowy, tender crumb and how long it stays fresh. The way it achieves that is through the use of a tangzhong. Tangzhong is an ancient cooking technique where you boil some of the flour that's used in your bread before you mix it in and bake your loaf. Boiling flour gelatinizes the starch. That allows it to absorb more water and hold its structure better. The key to making a long-lasting, soft, tender loaf. Get that gelatinization going and you're good to go. Thing is, gelatinization doesn't really happen while you're baking your bread until the very tail end. It's really hard to get good gelatinization throughout without overcooking the outside of your loaf. So, by pre-gelatinizing it using the tangzhong, you're able to build that structure faster and better within the loaf. This makes the best dinner rolls. You can do cinnamon rolls or really any sort of bread that you want to be just soft and tender. Use a tangzhong. The recipe we're using today comes from King Arthur Flour. It's their version. I'll have a link to their recipe down below. Some great things about milk bread is this beautiful dark brown crust that we get by basting it with a bit of milk before we bake it. The tender yet firm, soft, spongy crumb, and just really the beautiful, rich flavor that it has. It's sort of like brioche. It has butter, it has eggs. There's a lot going on in this bread. The recipe itself has a lot of ingredients. It's a lot more involved in that regard than the other breads I've done on this channel, but the end result, because you are doing this tangzhong and creating a dough that isn't as sticky and gooey, it's more forgiving, it's easier to work with, and you can turn out a phenomenal loaf your first time. So if you are just getting into bread making, start with a milk bread or start with another tangzhong bread. They're going to be absolutely phenomenal. Okay, enough preamble. Let's get into the recipe. To make a tangzhong, you need milk, water, and flour. Whisk together your water, milk, and flour. Do this while it's cold so you can get everything completely mixed before you put it on the stove. Now we're going to cook this over medium heat until a smooth paste forms and there are no lumps remaining. To make milk bread, you need flour, milk, the tangzhong, butter, sugar, an egg, dry milk, yeast, and salt. While your tangzhong cools, go ahead and gather the rest of your ingredients. Combine them all in the bowl of a small stand mixer. This recipe does not make enough for a large stand mixer. It's not going to get the right action in order to mix the dough, so you want to use a small one. If you don't have a small stand mixer, go ahead and either double the recipe for a large stand mixer or really get a workout and knead this by hand. Combine everything in the bowl, starting with 300 grams of bread flour, all of your tangzhong, 113 grams of whole milk, 50 grams of sugar, 57 grams of melted butter, 1 large egg, 14 grams of dry milk, 10 grams of active dry yeast, and 6 grams of salt. Get your stand mixer fitted with a dough hook, then process it on low for 10 to 15 minutes until it forms a nice, smooth, silky ball. Once the dough has been fully kneaded, go ahead, grease a bowl, and transfer the dough in. I'm going to just stretch and fold this into a nice ball shape and flip it over. At this point, my dough has always had a very sticky and pasty consistency, and it's worked out just fine. Cover it, let it sit for 60 to 90 minutes until it has gotten puffy, though it doesn't necessarily need to double in size. Go ahead, take a look, and it should be nice and puffy. Gently punch it down, just press it in to deflate it some. Then lightly flour your work surface. And turn out the dough. Now you want to divide this into 4 even balls. Those will be 170 to 175 grams a piece. So use your bench scraper. Go ahead, grease up your loaf tin. We're going to be doing the final proofing and baking in here. So gently shape each section of dough into a rough rectangle, then roll it up from one end to the other. You want the rectangle to be roughly as wide as your loaf pan, maybe a little wider so that it compresses. And tuck them all into the loaf pan side by side, touching. Get them nice and snug. We're gonna let these proof again for about 45 minutes. They'll get puffy again, and towards the end of that 45 minutes, go ahead and preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Hit like and subscribe down below. That way you can follow along as I offer up tips, tricks, and recipes every Tuesday. All right, after about 45 minutes to an hour, your little mini logs will have puffed up and will start to stick together. Now it's time to finish them up, get them in the oven. Get just a tiny little splash of the whole milk that you used earlier and lightly brush the tops of these loaves. This is going to do something very similar to what butter does. It will make just a brilliantly browned top crust. As always, get your loaf pan onto a baking sheet, load it into the oven. This is going to bake at 350 for 30 to 35 minutes. Be sure to turn it out immediately, otherwise it will steam in the pan and actually start to collapse in on itself. Not what you want. Like any bread, this needs to rest until it's room temperature before you cut into it. Otherwise, it's gonna let out all that delicious steam. So I will see you later. Let's get some butter on this. Great crumb. It's nice and dense, but still puffy and chewy. This is very similar to a brioche. It's got that butter in there. It's surprisingly sweet, at least to me. Since I make so much bread at home, I don't remember the last time I've had bread that had sugar in it, but it's not unwelcomely sweet. It toasts up great, like makes really phenomenal toast, especially if you fry an egg in the morning. It's probably my #1 toast for having a fried egg. A nice runny yolk just soaks into this toast. Oh, it's so good. So like I said, I know the recipe looks complicated. There are a lot more ingredients than the other breads that I've shown on the channel. But honestly, I think this is a more forgiving dough. This is a better dough, a better bread to start with if you are just getting into making bread, because it is so forgiving. You don't have to worry about the dough sticking so much. It has so much yeast in there that it's going to rise almost no matter what. You almost can't screw it up. And using the Tang Zhong really does give it a nice texture and helps keep it moist and fresh for a few days longer than a normal loaf of bread. It's a wonderful place to start, and this is really versatile. It can make excellent sandwich bread, toast. You can turn it into dinner rolls. I'm going to be modifying this recipe just a little bit to be making burger buns. Once I have that figured out, I will probably do a bread venture on that. Look forward to it. That's it for me this week. I'm PK Sullivan. This is Breakfast for Pancakes, and I'll see you next time.